So you've probably noticed that here in our worship space, we have the gift of a couple extra flower arrangements, more than we often do on a Sunday. These are gifts from a wedding that we celebrated right here for one of our own. Stephanie Fisher married Josh Ferry right in this space. And so it has me thinking about weddings. Weddings are that time of joy. It is a time of celebration. Something that I enjoy as a pastor is getting to know the couple so that we can listen together for what God is up to. That's always my joy, is listening and watching for God's fingerprints in our lives. And that process of leading up to a wedding is one of those great times to do that for me. But I have to tell you, there is one thing about a wedding that I will not touch with a 98-foot pole: the seating at the reception. Those charts of who sits with whom and all of those intricacies and all that complicated stuff, that Uncle Jack can't sit next to Aunt Jill, or that Cousin Boris likes Cousin Bullwinkle but not Cousin Rocky because of that thing that happened back in 1878. And this person likes that one, or they might have this in common, but don't put them with that. Oh my goodness. It's one of those times in our culture and in our lives together when we see so clearly how much it matters who's there at the table with us, right? And I can only think of one other time when that's more clear, and that's across the street at the high school. Remember when you were in school? Remember the cafeteria? Remember how much it matters or mattered who sat with whom? And how people would sort of flock together, and there would be a group over here that maybe you orbited around, or it mattered if you were over here in the corner on your own, and how you found your groups, or come into school as a new student. Well, who sits at the table with you matters a lot. And in fact, that's what we have in our first reading today too, is we've got problems with who's there at supper. You see, the good folks of Judea have heard this rumor. They've heard that Peter has been out where he doesn't belong. He's gone out into the outer darkness. He's been over across the line, places that he really is not supposed to be. He's been out there beyond the pale. Peter has gone to Lake County, where people do not cross that line. And so the good folks of Judea have hauled him before the church council. And the board of elders is there. And so is the board of evangelism, and probably the property committee too, just for good measure. And they've said, Peter, what are you doing? We have heard what you have done. And it's interesting. They're not upset that he went out there to the Gentiles. They're not upset that he went to give them Jesus. Because, let's be honest, going out there is okay. We kind of feel good about giving handouts. And telling them about Jesus is okay. We like the idea of converting people, so hopefully so that they can look and behave and act just like us. No, what they really get upset with is that Peter stayed for supper. Peter, you sat with these outsiders as though they're equal? Peter, you sat down for dinner with people who aren't part of us? Peter, you sat at this meal with people as though they are us and we are they and we belong together and we are all the same? Peter, what are you thinking? And I just love Peter's defense. Oh, I just adore it. Because the only thing he says in his defense is, it's all God's fault. He says, I was just minding my own business. I was praying. And I was in this sort of a trance when I had this vision. It was like a bed sheet lowered down from heaven by the four corners, held up there. And it got down, and I looked inside, and it was filled with all kinds of animals. It was like cockroaches and katydids. It was horses and hamsters. And this voice came and said, "Go ahead, Peter, grab something and have supper." And he says, my stomach turned over, and I said, "Not a chance. I've never done anything like that." And the voice says, "Peter, whatever God has said is okay and made okay, you don't get to say is not okay." He says it happened 3 times, as though somebody wanted to get my attention. 3 times this sheet came down. "Peter, go ahead, grab something to eat." "No, I don't do that. What God has said is okay, you don't get to set as not okay." And I came to, and 3 guys walked in, 3, as though somebody wants my attention. And they were not okay, but what God says is okay, maybe I don't get to say is not okay. He says, so I went with them. And I went to the house, and they wanted to know about Jesus. And he says, just as I started, I had hardly begun when the Holy Spirit showed up in a big way. The Holy Spirit landed in that place just like she did in Jerusalem on us back at Pentecost. Just the same way that she had filled us, she was there in the room and filled the people. And he says, what could I do? Who was I to hinder God? He says, you don't understand. I was just trying to catch up with what God was doing. Who we sit with at supper matters, doesn't it? Or take the other dinner party that we've got today. This is moving backwards. This is before Good Friday. And it's the night that Jesus is going to be arrested. It's just before Passover, and Jesus, knowing it's going to be the last supper he gets to spend with his disciples, gathers with them in the room. And after supper, he stands up and takes a towel and he ties it around his waist. And then he goes and he kneels down at the feet of his disciples. This is what slaves do. This is what a servant is supposed to do. And Jesus kneels there at their feet. And then gently, tenderly, carefully, Jesus reaches out and takes water and he washes away the dust and that caked up dirt from walking in sandals, the water running filthy. And he takes their aching feet and dries them with his own towel that's around his waist. Each of them so carefully. And he then goes to the next and kneels there. And he reaches out, the water running black with dust. And he so carefully takes care and washes their feet. And each to the next, on around the table, until finally he comes to Judas. And Judas, poor Judas, the devil's already got his hooks in him. And we don't know what it is that the devil says or how the devil snares him, but the hooks are already there. Judas is already looking for ways that he can turn Jesus over to the authorities. It's already there, all those thoughts, and Jesus kneels at Judas's feet and looks at him for a long time. Meets his eyes, looking at him. And then so carefully, so tenderly, reaches out to wash Judas's feet. And it's after this, as Judas has slipped out the door on his newly cleaned feet, Jesus still watching him go, that he says to the disciples, that is who you are. He says, I give you a new commandment. love one another the way I have loved you. Love like that, even as Judas slips out the door. Jesus says, you want to know who you are? You are my people who love like this. I don't know about you, but the idea of loving on command scares me. I don't know about you, but my sort of warm and fuzzy feelings don't work that way. I have never found that someone saying, love this person, that my heart necessarily follows. And this is one of the reasons why I am particularly grateful to be in a tradition that is concrete and not vague. Together, we are the inheritors of a tradition that teaches us that love in the Bible looks the way the Bible describes it, as actions, an action verb. Love in the Bible looks like Jesus, and it is something that we do more than something that we feel. Oh, the feelings will follow. The feelings will follow, but it's always in that order. Together, we don't talk here about a sort of vague, floaty, spirit of love, misty thing. When we talk about love, we're talking about something serious, something concrete. It is acts of service and grace, putting the welfare of the other above our own. It is love as an action verb, something that we can do on command. And I am so grateful to be in this tradition we share where we can understand that. Because faced with that kind of command, I need to be reminded of that. That God somehow is less concerned about the warm and fuzzy feelings that we have or don't have for each other. But God knows that those follow Jesus' commandment. And I'm also really grateful because in that commandment is an unbelievable freedom. Did you catch it? The fact that Judas was at the table, the fact that Peter was at supper with those that the Holy Spirit had chosen, there is a freedom that we have been given. We're not in charge of who's in and who's out. Isn't that good news? We're not responsible for deciding who's on whichever side of whatever line we've decided to draw, because God has this distressing habit of showing up on the other side of that line anyway. It is not our job to decide who is a sheep of Jesus' flock, a lamb of his own fold, a sinner of his own redeeming. We are set free. We are set free by the love of Christ for us. Set free to serve and love our neighbors. We are set free by the one who has invited us to supper. Because we know this is Jesus' table. We know that Jesus is the host here. And we know there isn't a single one of us that belongs here. But we are all invited. We are all invited by the host who gathers us, the host who feeds us, Jesus who loves us. Oh, it matters a great deal who's at supper, doesn't it? Because together we gather here so that we can feast with Jesus.